Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. You know, we turned 10 years old last month. I finally asked the archives what the original date was, and it was June 17th, excuse me. It was June 17th, 2015 we started the show. So I'm going to let the hair down today. Skinwalker Ranch is what we're talking about, right? So my salute to Native American upbringings, I'm going to let the hair down. So some of you will be instantaneously familiar. This comes from one of our listeners, and some of you won't know what this is. So this is an area in Utah. Been a lot of reports, first from the Native American Ute and Navajo tribes saying, man, something's weird in the desert right here. It's really, really strange. And then a family called the Meyer family bought it, Mormons, after the government stole it. And they said, well, I didn't know anything about this. These weird anomalies. And they owned it for a very long time, almost 60 years until they passed. But the kids of the Meyer family said, well, nobody told me about this weird stuff. But then a family called the Sherman family bought it. Man, that's when things heat up. So what we're going to talk about is a land in Utah where UFO sightings happen, where cattle mutilations happen, cattle abduction, invisible entities seemingly just crawling out of tunnels in the sky, blue orbs, orange orbs, all kinds of wild stuff. And then we're going to get into some of the other history around the area. So that's generally what we're going over in great detail. So this area is located in the Utah Basin near Ballard, Utah. It's 512 acres is technically what Skinwalker Ranch is. And that's a pretty good chunk of land. You could get to a point where you really couldn't see the border depending on how the land's set up. You get to about 2,000 acres and you really can't see the edge of what you own if you stand near the middle. But 512 is nothing to sneeze at, right? Now, back in the day, and we're going to get into detail of each one of these segments, but I'm just going to give you kind of the overview. The Ute and the Navajo tribes were the two tribes that lived in this area back in the day, and they didn't quite get along very well. And because there's a lot of lore management within Native American tribes, I mean, they believe in some pretty wild magic. They do. They started cursing each other. But what's really interesting about it is that the development of the cursing techniques and methods were more widely developed by the Navajo than the Ute. And so in the end, when stuff would continue to occur, the Ute, as we translate it from the history that we've read, they sort of said, okay, if anything's wrong with this land, it's the Navajo that did it because they've been cursing us like crazy. And it's either a play of like we didn't curse them as much or their curse technology is way more intense than ours. But imagine if someone invented the notion of cursing someone else, meaning to stick a curse on someone, not yelling dirty words at them, and you didn't have that because you just didn't need it. And it could be more terrifying if you didn't have anyone to kind of vet, oh, they're just blowing smoke, right? But when it came to seeing things, seeing weird anomalies, which this lasted for, again, they'll kind of estimate, and you have to understand the overall years that they say the Native Americans were here in the Americas before Europe came over and did what they did was only 750 years. And that's a statement they would make just before the turn of the century. The truth is, nobody really knows. It probably went back much, much further than that. Hence, Machu Picchu, all the amazing pyramids, step pyramids, wild big-ass pyramids, the giant people that used to live here. Go see my episodes on giants and pygmies. It's absolutely conclusive by multiple witnesses. We're talking hundreds of people from Europe coming over here that there was a giant civilization here, several different species, races, just like we have now. So something was going on anyway. Now, when this land of Utah is getting settled on by the Mormons in the 1800s, because up until the late 1800s, the Ute and the Navajo were basically the owners of the land, predominantly, right? You might have Shoshone go a little cycle through it. But the settlers in the 1800s were reporting sightings, weird lights and weird things before electricity was obviously available, and in addition, wired way out to the middle of Utah. What you have to understand about the Mormons is when they moved west to get to the Utah area, whether they knew it was there, probably not, they just found something they could manage. America hadn't declared itself to that degree west, so they were living in sovereign land. They were sharing it with the Navajo, with the Ute, with the Apache, and they fought like, cats and dogs. So what Americans don't understand is that the bloodline that ended up being the Mormon bloodline, it's a rugged, tough group of people, and they did some pretty nasty stuff that God would most likely not approve to get that land. Well, that's the history of it, right? The slaughtering of the Shoshones being one of the worst massacres in recorded history. Now, around the 1950s, when this Meyer family owns the land, and they're not seeing anything, well, we had a huge explosion in movies that had UFOs and that kind of thing. So in this particular area, people started looking up more, and that could be simply what it takes to see something that's in the sky. Douglas Adams wrote a funny chapter to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in his last two books where he had a society that never looked up, and so they didn't even know there were stars up there. They just never looked up. So it could be just, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and so you start reporting it, right? But 1994, one of the last individuals of the Meyer family, I believe Edith, passed away. Actually, sorry, she moved out in 92, continued leasing the land, went to a assisted living, and passed away a couple of years later. And that's when the Sherman family came in 1994 and bought the land. And pretty much immediately started reporting intense paranormal and wild experiences. And what's wild about what we're going to go through in this litany of things that they saw, because wow, it'll fill up an hour and some change real easily, is that the diversity of what they saw was just almost everything in the book. But because they never really exploited anything that they said, they didn't go for books and t-shirts or movie rights or anything like that, it lends credibility back to them that they were merely just reporting what had occurred. And there's other individuals around them helping to run the land that also said, yeah, I was involved with that one, involved with this one, but then I saw Mr. Sherman and he was terrified, so this guy's not a pushover. We'll get into it. But we just recently did the UFO UAP episode where I talked about the orbs, and specifically the orange orbs. What's really interesting about this one is that dating back to the Ute and Navajo tribes, they had seen the blue balls, the blue orbs in the sky, just running around. And this is before, any aviation in the United States of America of any kind. So it's predating a lot of what could have been some secret technology. Today, we would believe almost anything, right? But the Shermans start seeing this stuff now, the blue orbs. They'd also see the orange ones too, but apparently the blue orbs were much more prevalent, and the blue orbs were noticed because the cattle, the dogs, the sheep, everything was freaked out by the blue orb when it came by. It really affected animals. Not to say the orange one didn't affect, but whatever spectrum that is, they could see it really well. But they also saw, and this is interesting, they see your normal flying disc UFO, but they see the TR-3B triangle as well. Again, silent, big, hovering in the sky, and they don't report any escorts of any kind, no fighter jets or anything like that. Because they report orbs, you might assume maybe the orb's there too, but you never know. But now here's what's interesting. They also saw the flying cigars that my grandmother saw around 1920. Now, the Shermans are in there in the 90s, right? They don't buy the place till 94. But I did my research on one of the first sightings of the cigar-shaped vehicles, and apparently the Mormons, plus the Ute and the Navajo, had reported one of the earliest sightings of a flying cigar in 1897. This predates anything related to blimps. They also said that these flying cigars would have lights on them, which means they had a power supply up there as well. So even if you could believe that, okay, someone figured out a blimp and San Francisco area started flying it around without telling anybody, whether they would have a battery up there to run a lighting system, who knows? But this is really early in the system to have a full-fledged, sort of what we have today, system that could fly and have lights on it. And again, my grandmother never told me, she knew what a blimp was. So if there was like a living compartment underneath, like a Zeppelin where you have a nice building attached to it, or some sort of basket, she definitely would have leaned into that. And she said that she saw them multiple times with her sister. She said, we just go to this one ridge and we can just look out over the plains. But you could probably get 100 feet high in a ridge in eastern Kansas. Kansas is super flat on the west, but on the eastern side, as you go towards Missouri, you get a really kind of rumbling hill landscape, just in case you haven't been there. But then, and this is just an overview, man. We're going to get into the details in a second. This cattle mutilation thing. So the cattle mutilation thing is very interesting because we actually have above board government testing that does a very similar procedure, but they obviously don't call it mutilation. Mutilation tends to be what they call it when somebody did it to someone else's cow without permission. But what happens with the mutilated cow, and probably a lot of you have heard of this, but they find the mouth tissue and the anal tissue gone, but they also find all the blood gone. And that's not the only thing that they say was witnessed in this area. And the last section of this entire show is going to be all the wild things that independent people saw during these timetables with years. Some of it in the 21st century as well. But the theory is this. They did a hell of a lot of nuclear testing in Utah, in Area 51, a few other places in Arizona and Nevada, right? Well, the problem with that is that they didn't really understand what they were doing when they were, well, some of them did, when they were throwing all this, these elements up into the atmosphere. It's pretty well recorded that cancer rates went up in the United States after these tests, and there's even a rumor that John Wayne, having acted in the areas where these bombs had already been tested, you know, it's nice and clean, so they could film a movie out there. Some people think he caught cancer due to the testing. I think he smoked too, so, you know, who knows, right? But what they're trying to do is figure out the absorption of what's left after these tests. So how could you do that really easily? Well, you get a cow who's been eating grass. The grass is naturally coming out of the ground, which is where radioactive material landed before the cow was even born. And so the cow's eating it. And then it's bringing it through its body and it's excreting it. So what they're looking for is the isotope damage to the mouth versus the exit point. They want a differential and basically DNA damage between the two because they're going to use this data for human being analysis. We're also eating the veggies and everything around that area. Why take the blood? Well, the blood, because they always say, oh, it had not a drop of blood in it. Well, you know, who knows? I would love to hear how they would really certify the fact that it didn't have a single drop of blood in it. But bloodletting an animal is not exactly the hardest thing if you had a pump. Okay, you're looking for mutations in blood. What is the effect of the radiation that was absorbed in the blood? So let's say you have a differential between the mouth and the butt, and that's got a number. And so some general, some president goes, well, okay, that's great, but what does that mean to the human body? How are we actually hurting the internals of the human body? Well, they simply look at the blood. Now, I was told that was, this is like 25 years ago, that was nothing more than the government taking samples of other people's cattle. What doesn't make any sense about that is the cattle's always for sale. My uncle's been selling cattle for 50 years. If you wanted to buy one from somebody, you could. You just walk up with $500 to $5,000 and you go, I'll buy that cow off you right there. I don't want a ton of them, I just want one. And they'll sell it to you. So the idea that anyone would have to go onto someone's land and actually do this behind their back and potentially get caught, get shot, have to shoot back, all this other stuff, I'm actually backpedaling my certified theory in my mind that was all government experimentation If it was, there's something very funny about it for them to do that with potentially vehicles they've created that are anti-grav, you know. Now, the other one is that Mr. Sherman saw a wolf-like being running around his land, which he always accused of killing his sheep, his dogs, everything, his chickens, everything. And he thinks he hit it several times with a gun, and it didn't stop it. So maybe he's a bad shot, or maybe it's got thicker skin than whatever he happens to be firing at it. Be interesting to know, is it a shotgun which just leaves potentially buckshot in it? How close are you? You got a modified choke, or was it a 5.56 or 308? Like, it really should have stopped the creature. We don't have those details, unfortunately. And one of the other ones is they said that they sensed invisible creatures. Then when he was moving around his property during the day, and especially in the snow time, that he felt like, you know, he's hearing other steps behind him, but when he turns around, he can't see anyone. He also reported under several occasions that he actually saw portals open up in the sky, and either nothing comes out or something comes out. But when he did see an orange orb, Mr. Sherman said he actually saw a human being poke his head out. Interesting. Now, as I'm explaining this to you, I want you to think about an interesting theory. Imagine that this is some sort of simulation. And so these kind of time-banded doors opening up and people coming into our world is possible because of that, whether it be computer simulation or some other thing, right? Now, if you wanted to look in on your creation or your little, you know, I don't know, sampling of your own DNA or whatever the heck this place is, let's just say that were true. If you came in through the coast because you're going to land your UFO under the ocean or come down by the ocean and go, no one's here, and need to move in, you're going to get seen by very highly populated coastal regions. So we know the old story, right? You land in Oklahoma, you land in Utah, and so you literally want to have everything that you're going to use to do whatever observations or games you're playing, like the teasers. They come in and they land right at the most, I would say, sparsely populated area, and they don't really care if two people see it. They just don't care. They basically say it's like the Borg, there's no threat, right? But they claim to have seen shadow figures that when they looked at them, they couldn't see them, but when they started using infrared cameras later on in their life there, they could see beings in the infrared, which, remember, it's just a different temperature than everything else around it. It's looking for differential in temperature. So it's easy to find something that's hot in a cold world and cold in a hot world. At night, they would listen. And sometimes, this is probably one of the most eerie things you could put in a film. I've been out to Joshua Tree. At night, it's wild, you know. And there's parties going on here and there. Usually it's pretty in control. But they would listen, because they have 512 acres, and they would hear disembodied voices, which means, all that means is they can't figure out where the body is that's making the voice. But it was near enough, it sounded close, which, you know, under the right conditions in these types of areas, you could probably have a voice travel a mile out of someone's mouth, and it sounds like it's fairly close to you. But they said they would hear voices talking to each other in a language that they didn't understand. There was also an attempt to register the electromagnetic sort of waves that are going on in the atmosphere in that area, and there was a lot of spikes and what have you. They also said that when they would put out their equipment, as this thing evolved, that the equipment itself would get destroyed by something, with really no tracks of people coming up to it and destroying it. So there's no tire tracks, no human tracks. The stuff would just get destroyed. And the same goes for the animals. So when you're a farmer, when you're a livestock guy, and you start to meet your animals, you will understand micro-personalities depending on how much they exist before you slaughter them or sell them. And so I know for a fact in watching some of the documentaries on this years ago that they had, you know, certain cattle with names, and the cattle would be either a brand new, like, you know, year and a half, and all of a sudden it was dead without anything coming up to it. Didn't have any bite marks on it. It just stayed dead. And one of them, I know, didn't decay very much over the course of a week, where normally all the wildlife would eat this thing. Bugs would eat it. Something about it was tainted such that it just didn't get eaten. And that, predators know a lot about those sort of signals. I believe that animals recognize you eat it immediately or you don't eat it, because it's ionization. As the body dies, it starts to ionize, and it's just like ice cream that's been in the freezer for half a year. It just tastes weird, and it's got ice all up in the carton and stuff. They know it's just not healthy. You want to eat alkaline beef, right? Now, one of these discs that were flying over were seen by actual scientists who actually came out to the facility to track this kind of stuff. But they said that they looked up, they didn't see it, but they kind of felt like something was there, so they were using instruments to see it, and suddenly they could see it in the instruments. I think that's fascinating. Now, something in the research I did today, I had never seen anybody claim this about the area, but they actually claim crop circles. I've thought about doing crop circles for you guys as a complete episode, trying to track all the history, but I think it gets really boring really fast to be about a 15-minute episode. I think that there's a fairly convincing evidence that crop circles have been created by something that wasn't necessarily some college student doing stuff. It's the way that the fibers are folded in on themselves without breaking them, when they're woven like a ponytail. That's the ones that are most convincing. The ones that are just knocked down by a stick, you can kind of tell someone was just stepping on something. But I will give it to the people that have created the fake ones. It is phenomenal. Making anything you make gigantic that you can't perceive by looking right at it. It's a heck of a thing to think in 3D in your head and understand, if I keep going this way, that thing is going to start looking like this. Those farmers that mow, messages into their crops, it's always been pretty amazing when they get it really spot on. But they're reported crop circles in there. Now, one more before we get into some of the history here, is that nowadays, we're going to get into this whole thing, but nowadays it's obviously been purchased by a guy, which is, I think it's adamantium real estate or something. He bought it to exploit it for a television show, which I believe is on Discovery Channel, or History's Mysteries or something like that, History Channel. And I watched the show that is the Skinwalker Ranch show, and it is the most embarrassing show I've ever seen. The only thing that ever gets interesting is when they interview the Sherman family members or guys that worked for Mr. Sherman, and they start to recall stories, and you're looking in their eyes and you're trying to see if they got the call signs that they're lying and stuff. They're pretty good liars, or there was some pretty legitimate stuff when the Sherman family was there, but they try to create all these anomalies, and they use all this whip pan techniques to keep you completely nauseated watching this show. But they have not recorded anything at all interesting. It's so pathetic that these guys on the show will say, "I saw it, man. Well, I didn't get it on camera." Oh, dang, man. Didn't get it on camera. You can build a GoPro 360 rig for, I think, probably $1,000. I filmed a 360 movie in LA for a professional situation with just GoPros. I mean, my God, we had to hide the director as an actor in his own movie so he could watch what was going on and not be in the shot, right? So there's no excuse for that kind of production. So let's talk about the history of the land itself, because I think it's interesting for you to know sort of the full lineage of this stuff. I've told you a lot of this stuff. But like I said, the Ute and the Navajo were the primary tribes that were on this land. And, you can prorate it back, and maybe a lot of you know Native American history as to when each one of those tribes migrated and called out their name for the first time. So you can probably find a little bit more lineage in the area. But I think they were there for a very long time. And you have to understand, Utah is pretty formidable land. It's got gorgeous, lush areas, and it's got really gorgeous, rocky areas, But like I said, the tensions grew because as the tribes grow, they have to share land, share resources, and then get angry, right? And so this cursing routine started. Now, the sightings of the Native Americans were, if you really meticulously look at how they were reported, who knows how accurate these reports are, but it looks to me like there was definitely anomalies going on, and as per their opinion, and there's petroglyphs in there, stone drawings of humanoid beings that are definitely not humans in the petroglyphs in this area. Now, I need to see those with my own eyes to believe that they're actually created back in that era, because it's just way too easy for someone in the modern age to do it, just like they did it all over the temples in South America, where they drew the baby sacrifice cartoons by European artists to make sure that everyone thought those people were savages. So, are you ready to kill them now? You ready to get some free real estate? Luckily, they failed on most of those occasions. But in the early 1900s, before this land is purchased by the Meyer family in the 1930s, they did have, folks in the area saying, look, there was the definite normal hardships of the area, because the Mormons were already there in a big way. But they said, there was just too many occurrences, like things, bringing out some cattle, and then they get killed. And they're like, what the hell happened to my cattle? No one else seems to have them. They're dead here on the ground. And so, it's almost like keep out. We're going to make it difficult for you. We're not trying to kill you. We're just going to make it difficult. In none of my reports has any human being died in this thing. So again, there's that whole thing about aliens being really rough and tough on human beings, and they're all demonic and la la la. But you don't have a big pile of human bodies anywhere in these abduction stories, that kind of stuff. Now, just to stress, the Myers family didn't see anything. They didn't report a single thing. Maybe they just didn't see. Maybe they did touch whatever was pissing off anything that's there. But they also did land leasing, which my family still does to this day. So you can own 512 acres and you don't work the land. And so all the stories are with the people that actually work the land, and you just go, la, 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 thanks for the check. Just so you know. Could be the way it is. But in 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman buy the property. But what's interesting is they only owned it for 2 years. It freaked them out so much that in 2 years they were out. So in 1996, Robert Bigelow, this billionaire, he buys it, and he establishes the National Institute of Discovery Science. NIDSI is kind of what they call it. This guy brings in tons of scientists, tons of equipment, professionals from every single stretch of the military. Says, we're going to figure out what this is. Now, what's wild about that is by 94, you have all these sightings from the Sherman family, and we're going to get into their sightings and what happened. I mean, they've got some unbelievable, fascinating stuff, which I know has been claimed to be witnessed. Some of the most amazing things that the Sherman family went through in those 2 years were witnessed by local people that work for them. And I've seen their interviews, and it's very convincing. I was going to say, there's no weird telltale signs. They're telling a tall tale. Well, NIDSI runs for, I think, about a decade, and then it was disbanded. And Bigelow maintains ownership of the land until 2016, when he sells it to this adamantium real estate company. Now, that was revealed that a guy named Brandon Frugal owned that company, and this is who owns it to this day, as far as I understand. He's the one that's running the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch show on the History Channel, not Discovery. I don't recommend it unless you want to get into debunk mode. If you want to put your debunk hat on, have fun with that, right? Now, going back to the Native Americans, one of the interesting distinctions about the Ute and the Navajo going at it is they actually ended up being classified as spiritual warfare. And that's just wild. Now, I'm going to add a little of my own DNA in this. The first movie I ever wrote that was professionally finished and pitched around, it was in green light pipeline in 2020, and then COVID happened, right? It sucks, right? Turning it into a book right now, so you guys will be able to read it in much more detail than the script. But it has a heavy Native American element in it. I grew up in Neosho County, but it was generally known that the most prevalent tribe in my area came up from Oklahoma, the Osage tribe. But we had Shawnee, and we had a ton. I mean, it's just a real good melting pot. So one of my employees at Electronic Arts was a Stanford grad out of the math department. And I was able to work with him to get some of the sort of behind the scenes beliefs of a lot of the Native American tribes, which he would go out to the reservations during festivals, and he was involved with, various shamanism studies. He just thought it was interesting. He wasn't a shaman or anything. He might be one now. I don't know. But he told me about a lot of the curses that were happening, back in the day, and had been going on for, hundreds of years. And one of the things they believe is that they can take the spirit of a dead person who was, say, darker on earth, and they could attach it to you, and they could send it as far as they need to send it, because they're just basically saying, that guy, this girl, here's the piece of cloth, here's something from them, find them and curse them. So there is a heavy system of belief in that. There's only one tribe, I think, that even has a metaphor for a true devil. And I think that for most of the belief systems, they have a very homogenous belief of evil, which is there is no devil except for you. You either make the devil inside you or you don't. So take your pick. And I think that's a wonderful take on that, because it puts the responsibility directly square on your shoulders. And explains a lot of the people that went to an island. But Skinwalkers is 100% a Navajo tribe, and it's part of their system. My buddy, I believe, called them soul stealers, was one of, and he says they still do it to this day, but you're not allowed to know that this happens. Now, when I studied for my script over the course of a decade, working out of Stanford University's library, which had this old section, I talked about my Egyptology books were all written before 1920, so it wasn't censored stuff, it was good. I eventually bumped into enough people that basically said, yeah, when the Native Americans realized that the white man would pay for information about the Native American tribes, they just started making up stuff, and they just took money. It's like, ha ha ha, that's hilarious, right? We're not going to tell you about who we are. You just slaughtered us all and stuck us on these little plots of land they call reservations. And then you blame us because we drink too much or something. I mean, come on, you don't let us live. It got so bad between these two tribes that they thought that certain areas of this land, both inside this Skinwalker Ranch area, the 512 acres, but surrounding areas too, that there were areas you just didn't travel. They thought that certain areas had had too many battles and there was too much bad blood in the land to even travel over it. Isn't that interesting? Now, it's really fascinating. I'm going to throw you a curveball here. This is real deal belief. A lot of Native American tribes believe that when you die, you turn into a star. I think that's gorgeous, right? It's just soul energy up there looking down. But they also, let me pause on that for a second. Now, in Japan at Fukushima, the big earthquake, when I were out there looking at a bunch of cars and people who had drowned to death, there's a documentary on this, and I can't remember where I saw it, but a lot of you will have seen this. The Japanese believe that your soul shows itself in an orb of light. And there are multiple people over there who volunteered, who came in from the south, came in from inland, to help find bodies that were in a car, because not all the cars were full of people, right? A lot of them were just washed out from parking lots. And so they were really desperately trying to get a hold of bodies before they decayed too much. But they said that orbs of light, which we saw a couple orbs come in with the tsunamis, it's on film, but they said they would see this orb of light that would jump between car to car and slowly wait for the human to go, okay, I see where you are, I'm coming to that car. And as soon as it figured out that the human was coming to the car, it would slowly move over to another car and wait. And every place the orb went, there was a body, which when you're searching and hunting through hundreds of cars and thousands of cars, that's a miracle. So that's in, 2013? The Navajo and a lot of the Indian tribes in the area, they believed that when you saw an orb of light, that was a spirit. They call them spirit lights. That was your spirit, which you call a soul, in a different vocabulary. That's it. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? And, what's kind of funny about it for me is that it seems extremely obvious to me personally that the Native American tribes kept migrating north until they got to the Eskimo realm and then hopped the land over there. And the reason why the Asian race is just on the edge of the Pacific up there is that is a new sort of configuration of the mating over there to create a whole nother very Eskimo looking eye socket, right? But it goes down and makes Japanese, Chinese, Taiwanese, Vietnamese, these amazing people. Philippines got mixed with some Spaniards. So if that lore came out of the Americas thousands of years ago, not 700 years ago, right? We got China back to what, 3,500 years or whatever. Okay, so you take the Native Americans back 10,000 years easy, and you push them over there, and they procreate to the point they create their uniqueness, right? Now, the Native Americans also thought, after they had observed this stuff for a very long time, we have no idea how long they saw this, what they would call a portal between two worlds was thin places in the world. Or I should say, thin places between worlds, like a membrane that you could walk through. I love the choice of words. Now, of course, they weren't speaking in English, but when we got things translated, that's the best approximation. Their distinction with shadow beings, I just love the way that Native Americans they're not trying to start anything. They're just observing and using a really healthy mind. They said the shadow people are basically people that you can't catch. That's their classification of them. How great is that, right? But they also reported a series of animals that were deformed and had glowing eyes. It could be what Mr. Sherman said he reported with the wolf man sort of being. Now, when you did traverse on cursed land, remember those areas they said you shouldn't go? The reason why that developed was that they said that they would go out on hunts. And again, this land is so wide open. There's no skyscrapers or places to get lost. They said they have, had witnessed hunters just vanish. They just disappear. And when they saw that, they said, okay, back up, go the other way. That's at least where it starts, right there, where that person disappeared. And so one other person comes on the other side, and he disappears. Okay, that's where they cordon it off. Now, here's another really interesting one. They talk about dream visitations. So Native Americans said that they would talk to people with giant black eyes that would give them warnings. Now, for the OG listeners, that should be a little clue. What other large almond eye story giving a warning have I told you on the show? And it's the Zimbabwe sighting at the school, which is one of the most convincing sightings of children, several children, 3 feet away from an alien, basically a darker gray, who had landed his vehicle outside of a school. A bunch of kids see this. They're too young to be elaborately lying consistently. They all draw pictures of what they see, and it's generally the same thing. Of course, some kids are more talented than others, and they brought them back together 20 to 25 years later, and these people have PTSD. Some people lost their spouses because of it. A bunch of kids. Now, if it's just some imaginary thing and they made it up, well, I'm sure they could let go after 25 years. And they wouldn't show up to talk about it and be basically stressed out. But it's interesting how the Native Americans said they got ominous warnings. I wish I knew what they were warned about, right? Now, do you remember the story that goes that when the Europeans came over in their ships, normal Native Americans who should have been able to see the ship couldn't see it because they'd never seen anything off the ocean before, so they had no recognition of what that thing they're looking at could be. But it was that the shamans who were trained to see things that were unseen, they saw the ships and they were like, whoa, something's coming this way, and it keeps getting bigger. And they reported, my people couldn't see you until you stepped off of the boat and they saw your human figure, and then they knew what you looked like, so they understood what you were. So in this particular area, I just want to throw that at you. The shamans, or the medicine men, said they were non-human entities that guarded sacred portals. And so they actually seem to have figured out what I don't see reported on the white man side of the game, which is that by having a more logical, simple view of things, which is what all geniuses do, right? Don't overcomplicate things, man, right? Simplify. They were able to start seeing, potentially, if any of this is true, why do they have to lie, the pecking order of some of these beings. Like, these beings seem to protect that door. Protecting a portal, that's actually pretty interesting, right? Protect it from what? Well, it's a two-way problem. Someone coming out, being attacked, but more importantly, someone going in without permission. Now, if you're a hunter out there and you get sucked in, well, you get yourself a free pass, right? Now, when they saw something in the sky, a lot of folks, a lot of Native Americans in the area would sometimes say that was an omen. A lot of times that is just translating something that frightened you, and you're not able to get rid of the PTSD of being frightened. You don't understand why this is happening. So like when a crow flies in and lands on your bed back in the 1800s, well, that could mean that, you have limited time on this planet. Get your orders, your affairs in order. Now, the petroglyphs I mentioned. I'll try to find the photographs of them. I've definitely seen petroglyphs analyzed in the show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. They have larger heads than normal, which has always been the thing with every sighting of most aliens that have been talked about. What's interesting is even though there is a very steady, rumor mill about reptilian aliens, you never hear about a reptilian having a bigger skull. And you really don't hear about them getting out of ships and doing anything. It's always the Greys, the more simple sort of elven type of mentality, the Vulcan mentality. Well, we're in charge, but we're not here to kill you because we could, You're here and you're okay, so stop calling me a demon. Because if I was one, you wouldn't last a split second. We take back this world from God. And that's not happening. Now, one of the other observations that the Native Americans talked about was floating beings. So beings that were crossing the land but floating. They weren't walking on the ground. Who knows what that could be? Maybe they're standing on a disc. Maybe they just have that capability. Maybe they're not fully realized in this universe. Now, the other thing that you definitely learn when you live in the Midwest is by living centuries and centuries in this the state of being balanced with nature. That's what the Native Americans, because a lot of the criticism, again, is that Native Americans didn't have the wheel when we found them. Part of it is, do you need it? They didn't have the horse, right? So do they need it? Are they able to exist without this stuff? And I think the answer is obviously yes. But their tracking capabilities were incredible. And that's how they were able to track animals that they wanted to kill and eat. And of course, I think most of you know that the Native Americans were the most efficient human beings in consuming whatever animal that they laid down for eating reasons, right? The furs got saved, the skin got saved, the intestines were eaten in a competition. I mean, they jerkied half of it and ate half of it on a fire. I mean, it was just tremendous. They never wasted anything, and they thought it was a sacred experience to take life, to sustain life, right? So they're amazing trackers. The government would use them as well during various wars. They said that they would have beings that were sighted running away, moving from point A to point B, and they would go to the footprints trying to figure out what it was, right? Because if it's a hoof, it might be this. If it's got a human foot, it's that. But they said that they would go right to where, and this is multiple occasions, right to where it was, and there's no footprint on the ground. Now, there's no distinction whether or not they heard a footprint. Maybe it's just the floating folks. Who knows, right? Now, this is an interesting one because they also report seeing thunderbirds. There are a couple photos online, which I don't know if they're real, but my gosh, if they're real and thunderbirds were real. There's one where one was brought inside a building and a guy was standing in front of it. There's actually quite a few. There's a lot of AI ones and a lot of crappy Photoshop ones. They may all be fake, but one in particular, if I can find it, is pretty wild. But this is a bird that has an amazing design to it, very angular, very much like the logo in a Thunderbird car. But it was, I mean, if I'm sitting here guessing how wide this thing was, we're talking its wingspan might be 25 feet. It was called a Thunderbird. And they said that these would actually come out of these portals, and they were not part of, normal sightings. And of course, the Native Americans knew every species of everything, every bird, everything. They had a name for everything. Now, when this started heating up, you started getting ritual pacification situations. Okay, so they were like, maybe these people just want to be paid tribute to, and so some of the tribes would lay down food and what have you. I know the Egyptians, and this is actually a brilliant concept. I mentioned this a long time ago in my Egyptian episodes. They would lay out food for the dead. And you've heard that all over the place. The Japanese do it. Every culture has done it. But there's an interesting distinction of why they think it's real. especially in the olden days, as a fruit would rot and shrink, the way they perceived that process to occur was that the life was being sucked out of it by the other side. Very intuitive, right? Who knows if it's real, but it's going to do it anyway, right? Now, the other one kind of gets a hybrid. This is before we go into the actual Sherman family. But the last point about the Native American sightings was that they have canyons everywhere. And so when someone speaks a little bit loud and the wind isn't very intense, it will bounce off all the surfaces. So if you went bop, it would bounce all over the place, right? And so when they had the disembodied voice thing, they were very scared of hearing of a language that they didn't understand. And so this is going to be something that the Shermans actually experience as well. But when you've grown up in a world where you're one with Mother Earth, and there are very few mysteries out of that ecosystem, right? The only mysteries you might have is someone telling you something, right? To have a mystery launch out of the environment, whoa, what's that language? Well, now the other one I want to throw at you is, if you look at my G.E. Kincaid episode, and there's a lot of stuff online about this, there really seems to be convincing proof that the Egyptians made it over here. There is no proof that there was a crossover between the presence of the Egyptians here and the Native Americans existing at the same exact time. What if that was a lost tribe of the Egyptians? Who knows? Or they crossbred with something else that was already here? Don't know. Be some wild genes, wouldn't it? Now we're over to the Sherman family. We're going to go through a little bit of history, what they said. I'm going to skip any repeat stuff so you don't have to endure that. But the blue orbs were interesting and cited quite a bit. And one of the things they said that was a routine occurrence is when the blue orb showed up, the dogs could see it and would chase it, just like a car. Now, out of the cattle mutilation side of the Sherman stories, which were, again, there was the carving of the mouth and the anus and the blood gone. That happened several times, okay? And that stuff costs money, right? There's sort of an overtone that the Sherman family lost money, and that's why they kind of had to bug out. But they said that on multiple occasions, not that many, but a couple of the cattle just completely vanished, which if you were to lose track of an animal and he were to walk way away from where you live, busted through a fence or something, one, you see the breach in the fence and usually get a bunch of them breaching if that occurs, right? But to have your eye on a cattle, on a particular cow, and it just to vanish out, and you the inventory of your animals, especially if you're not like the Panhandle in Oklahoma where there's 3.5 million cows, you wouldn't know everybody's name. These are really conservative numbers where you would have a cow with a white patch on its head, and you might give it a name like Martha, and that's how you know. But they had a cow once disappear while there was snow on the ground. And what Terry did was he followed the footsteps, because that's just the way you do it, right? You follow the footsteps, you might find it dead, you might find it frozen, whatever. But the footsteps just stopped, like it was pulled into the air. So in terms of him classifying this as a vanishing cow, he's adding more empirical evidence to it than just, I think it just vanished, Footsteps in kind of like Danny in The Shining, right? Again, tons of hovering orbs, both blue and orange. Now, this is one where I want to say it's the sheriff of that community, but it's some official from the town was with, Terry is the guy, right? Because Gwen is the wife. He had called the sheriff because he's like, man, I got something attacking my animals. And one of the specials I saw that was the probably that History Channel where they're interviewing the Sherman family members, but also the sheriff. The sheriff was really dry and nice. I mean, he just kept it cool. He said that dude was packed constantly. He always had a gun on him because he didn't know when something was going to start occurring. And it was mainly, as far as I understood it, was to protect his animals, not really to shoot whatever was doing it, but to kind of scare it away. But of course, after he saw this wolf creature I think it changed his entire opinion about how effective these weapons are. But this interview with this guy took us to a shed. And he said, I'm going to tell you the God's honest truth. He said, look, he opens the door to the shed because he's missing some cattle. And he said, just like hamburger patties, I think it was 3 or 4 in a double column. The cattle were stacked up inside the shed. And he goes, at first, we think that they've been in here a while, but he saw them the day before. So he goes, that's impossible. Then he realized that they were alive. The one on the bottoms were crushed. They weren't alive because they were just suffocating, but other ones were actually breathing and suffering from just being on their side, which is not natural, obviously, right? And so they were, I never heard how they dealt with this, but I don't even know how you pull a cow down, right? I mean, how would you do that? You have to be careful not to break their legs and all kinds of stuff. But this dude was very, very serious about this. He wasn't very playful, didn't think it was funny, but he was like, stuff was going on here. Stuff that he could do. I mean, you couldn't move I'm just telling you, you can't just move a cow that's awake. You just can't. You know, you could maybe sedate it, I don't know, and you put a forklift underneath it, but where's the forklift? And there'd be marks all over it if you used machinery to do it. And, you know, if you've worked a forklift, imagine a big organic cow on the end of that thing. Good luck, right? And this was packed in a place where there's no side access to it, as far as I could tell. One of the other things that was very distinct was that just like Time Bandits, the show, which if you haven't seen, it's Terry Gilliam's show from, I think, 1980. Brilliant movie about a little kid that runs off with these time bandits who has stole a map from God that shows a bunch of doors between realities. And so you can go back in time, forward in time. It's a comedy. It's absolutely hilarious, but it's so beautifully done. But Sherman said he would see like portals open up in the sky, and he goes, there's blue sky up inside the portal, which I assume would be whatever weather pattern he's got going, whatever time of day he's seeing this, it's not blue sky. So it has the distinction of a portal. Whether it's round or rectangular, I don't know. One of the other ones is that machinery on his land would move, and he's the only guy working it. And so he says, you know, it'd be something as small as a tool or up to a piece of heavy equipment would move. And I believe that sheriff guy talked about that as well. I hope I have his position right. Don't regret saying that. Now, the other one was claims of a poltergeist. And we know the movie Poltergeist showed up in 1982. So if you see that movie and you're looking for some attention, you might lift that a little bit. But he was saying the very same thing that happened in the movie, that objects in the house would move around a little bit. He also reported that anything electronic on his land would malfunction quite a bit. So cell phones, and again, this is 94 to 96, so you really kind of have your first candy bar radiation sticks out there. But, you know, use minimal equipment when you're out there. So if it doesn't work, you have the equipment because you need it, and then it doesn't work right. But he said it was really aligned with sightings. So when the sightings would happen, then all this stuff would occur. Now, the other really cool one, and this is in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind from, I believe, 1978, was that, and because Richard Dreyfuss saw this in the movie, right, fictional movie, he said he would see, Mr. Sherman would say this, he saw beams from the sky scanning the ground below, just randomly out in the distance, right? And that was in Close Encounters, so it's always interesting when Hollywood gets it right before the humans say they see it, right? Again, like I said, he saw, you know, various shapes of vehicles, discs and triangles that were absolutely silent, about 40 to 50 feet in diameter or along one side, that would just be quietly up in the sky. Now, on the cattle mutilation thing, he said there was a cow that was born, and he tagged its ear. And he said he was no more than 200 feet away from this little calf, and within 45 minutes, it was mutilated. So in terms of a team of U.S. soldiers coming down on behalf of scientists, or scientists on behalf of whatever, couldn't happen if this story's true. He also reported that before he saw any sightings, he would get this really angsty anxiety right before it would occur, and that's when he knew he could look up and see something. That's very interesting, because that would be some sort of, I can tell you from experience, like electromagnetic field that's on your body that is sort of just playing with your chemical structure in your head, and then you will feel really strange. One of the things you may not know if you have never been in an earthquake is there is sometimes a massive discharge of electromagnetic energy. I was sitting in a breakfast place on the coast in Newport, and it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I got my food, and we just gotten the food, and all of a sudden there's this rumble, boom, and there's this, my stomach sank. I literally felt ill. And everybody else in the restaurant was like, oh boy, I feel really bizarre. And I was like, yeah, you feel that, right? And I was with the girl at the time, and I was like, is it just me? She's like, no, man, that was just bizarre. It just hit our guts. Like, it makes your gut heavy. It's really strange. And it went away, and we ate our food, but wow. Now, according to the Sherman family, Terry and Gwen sold the land because of straight up loss of revenue from cattle being destroyed, things being moved around, and just the simple stress of the entire thing. So that lends some credibility. We're going to go into their family just a little bit. The way that this land got captured was in the late 1800s again. The government takes the land from the Native Americans, and then they put it on auction, which they call the federal land patents, or auction, in the early 20th century, so the 1900s. So now let's just quickly, with about 4 bullets, go over, do we think the Sherman family was just exploiting this whole thing? How is it that the Meyer family lived there for nearly 60 years, and suddenly the Shermans move in there, and all hell breaks loose to the point they lose track of the land in 2 years? Well, now let's think about this. 1994, they buy the land. They only have it for 2 years. Well, what could they have done to exploit this in a way that they could make a lot of money? Well, they got to be careful, because if it's not happening and they tell a bunch of people it is happening and people come out and set up like communes out there, they never see anything and they'd be a fraud. Not good. When they first started reporting this stuff outside their immediate circle, they actually were anonymous. They used pseudonyms to identify themselves. So they weren't interested in anyone kind of coming on and asking too many questions. They never wrote a book personally, and they never signed off movie rights. Now, movie rights, they would have had to, with these kind of stories, because a lot of people will come to me, and this is a little piece of advice on the side. They'll say, man, I've lived such a life, I'm going to write a movie about myself. And it's like, okay, that's great. But do you have an ending yet? Because without an ending, you don't have a movie. And that just neutralizes about 99% of everybody. Now, some people are like, yeah, I climbed Mount Everest on my elbows after I had leukemia, and I got one leg knocked off. I mean, then you have an ending. But otherwise, people are just kind of, I don't know, going through some egotistical spin there. But a guy named George Knapp and Colm Kellner wrote a book on it. So they did it on the side. And again, you don't need to ask permission unless you're going to start using people's names in a way that would be outside of recorded history, or if you are saying something very personal about an individual. I helped put together a book called Tales of a Rat with the drummer of Rat the Band. And we wrote, he had written, about a couple ex-girlfriends, and he did not use their full names, but I think he used their first names, and he learned a lot from these people. He loved these 2 women. But eventually, when we put it through an attorney, the attorney's like, look, get these chapters out of here, because these are real people. And even though you're not giving their last names, if there is a chance that a normal human being could find out who that person is by looking it up, you're on the hook for whatever you say. Interesting. Now, as far as I understand, they're still alive, and they haven't said a word. They haven't, actually, sorry, I think Terry passed away. Maybe both of them passed away, because I did see the show that was on History Channel, and I believe they were talking on behalf of these individuals. At least the gentleman who owned the place has passed, right? So when the Meyer family bought the land, just a little distinction here, they owned it for 60 years. When they first got it, they didn't have any electricity. They didn't have any piped water. Okay, they would haul it in from Fort Duchesneas. I don't know. But they were asked, at least some of the family members of the Meyer family were interviewed about this area, and they said, "Man, did you hear them say anything about seeing anything?" And the family was emphatic. Absolutely not. They saw no UFOs, no orbs. They didn't see any aliens. They didn't have any issues. Now, I don't know if they had livestock on the land. You would think they'd have to if they didn't have any, access to food. You have to grow your own food, right? And everybody wants meat back in those days for sure. But the gentleman, Kenneth Meyer, he died in 1987, and Edith Meyer died in 1994. So now we're going to pull back and talk about other things that were going on in neighboring areas. Because, hey, is there other corroborating evidence that this area is a hotbed for these kind of things? You would think it would have to be. I mean, 512 acres is not enough land to claim that everything happens in that area. And it's not the only place. So since the 50s, okay, all the neighboring counties have plenty of sightings of especially the glowing orbs and the silent crafts and the humanoid figures. The organization MUFON has spent a lot of time in that area reporting and collecting all the data that people have said they found. There's a reservoir there called Bottle Hollow, and it's near this Fort Dutchney. I don't want to really say it, but they had said that there's a body of water there, and that they have reports over the years of seeing vehicles go into the water and emerge from the water. And the elders, the Ute elders of that area said they saw definitely non-human entities inhabiting the area, which is very interesting. Now, if you watch the show, they'll actually highlight that there's a ridge in the Skinwalker Ranch area, and that people who are just looking for stuff in the middle of the night with infrared, or they have cameras set up, they're just recording. And again, where are these movies? They'll say that, they'll look out and they can see the horizon in the background, whatever light is coming over the ridge. Of course, the ridge should be black or something, right? But even with light pollution, they can't see these beings, but in the infrared, they get to see them, which is really strange anomaly if that were true. Now, the other one is Dugway Proving Ground, which is a southwest of Salt Lake. This is an area where, again, it's very close to some of the testing that they did for nuclear bombs. My buddy Richard grew up there as a kid, and he said that he lived in Salt Lake City, and they would announce a test on the television, and this is how close this was. He'd be in the front room, and of course they're scaring all the children into just being terrified, this duck and cover era in the 50s. He was born in 44. And he said he would go to his window in his bedroom, and suddenly they'd see the bright light over the horizon in the middle of the night. And he would just be utterly terrified as a kid because, what do you tell a kid? The television's telling you to fear the apocalypse, right? But this is an area that actually had a lot of rumored UFO sightings, but it's also an area where they may have done biological weapon testing, the binary weapons especially. There's a famous situation where a ton of sheep died in some chemical weapon test, and based on a friend of mine who used to work in binary weapon testing, what they do is they spray an A on whatever the target is, and the animal's fine. It's two halves of a chemical. Then they spray B, and the A reacts, and it asphyxiates instantaneously. Actually, what it does is attacks the nervous system. And all the beings would, all the little sheep would just seize up and die. And he said he was a part of one of those deployments of the bee. So he goes, we sprayed this stuff out the back of a cargo jet. And he goes, we just sat and watched these little guys who were all lit up for cameras, just all fall on the ground immediately. It's very Andromeda strain. And supposedly some of this stuff, has been leaked out by whistleblowers. And, if that's the case, usually the genetics behind a whistleblower is that they've seen stuff that was so terrifying that they want it to stop. And so they're whistleblowing to get the public to step in to help stop it, But yeah, that test on the sheep happened in 1968, and 6,000 sheep just suddenly died due to a chemical test. And of course, there's rumors that it was some sort of attack from aliens. And again, come on. If the aliens are doing that kind of stuff, why on earth would they stop I mean, are they really wondering if what they're going to do is going to kill a sheep? I mean, come on. They've never been related directly to anyone saying, oh, they came in my bedroom and ripped my mom's head off, you know, and ate my dad halfway down. You know, that just doesn't exist out there. Spanish Fork Canyon in 1974, the police chased a bright object, reportedly that disabled their radios. Well, isn't it interesting that the writers of Close Encounters of the Third Kind have that exact scene in it? It's great. In the 2010s, and the American Fork, numerous daytime sightings of triangular black aircraft, so the TR-3B. Now, to have a triangular aircraft based on our UFO and UAP episode still flying in 2010, well, that's interesting. That would be using the new anti-gravity system, which would mean they wouldn't have necessarily the orbs on all the four corners, and especially not the one in the center, because there wouldn't be that need for that particular propulsion design. 1970s, in Nephi, Utah, cattle ranchers reported seeing cattle being lifted up in a beam of light and disappearing into a vehicle that was disc-shaped. In Logan Canyon, in the 2000s, hikers reported seeing gray aliens watching them from a vantage point on a hill where they couldn't climb up to get them. You know, it's just too steep. It'd be like being in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. They're just on the cliff above you looking down. You're going to have to find a path somewhere to get up there. And by the time you get up there, they'll be gone, right? The other one is Bryce Canyon National Park. And they say multiple rangers over the years have reported seeing non-human figures in the canyon. And they are actually by remote rock formations. And consequently, the reason why they saw them is that they were out trying to watch a meteor shower. Interesting. As if that is something else, right? One of the more romantic stories behind a meteor shower, which the first thing about meteor showers you should know is, how the hell does NASA know a meteor shower is coming? We can barely see a gigantic UFO coming in from Jupiter. I mean, you know, to say that these meteorites are somehow just visible like a band of gnats in the sky, and suddenly you're like, well, it's probably going to hit about on Friday, on Saturday, about 2 o'clock. You know, it's like, really? But if they were alien spaceships coming in that are already on a schedule, you tell the public it's a meteor shower, and the public goes, wow, look at that, that's a meteor. And it's actually a UFO landing and going underwater somewhere, or landing in Area 51 or S4 or whatever. And in Heber City, I think I got that right, Heber City, in the 1990s, several folks say they saw these tall, pale humanoid creatures near the Provo River that were communicating with them telepathically. Very interesting. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to report that, what did they say? What was your conversation? Let's start comparing notes. So when you hear those kind of reports without the actual details, you're kind of like, you know, whatever. Now in Moab, which I guess is a place out there, M-O-A-B, in the early 2000s, campers said they saw a little silver craft hovering around them and moving around. Then they experienced missing time, which is very interesting. I love the concept of the aliens and the missing time, although if it happened to me, I'd probably freak out. Whitley Strieber, towards the end of his book, Communion, has a scene that is the best part of the whole book, where he talks about coming home to his apartment. This is after being abducted and having problems with his colon, that he got home, you know, early evening, and all of a sudden just time starts jumping and jumping and jumping to the point he's trying to run out to get in his car. You do have to understand, he's a great screenwriter. He wrote, was it Cat People? He's definitely a massively talented writer. So him coming up with that, just to kind of juice up the book at the end, might be. Now, to go back to that Bigelow guy who had that NIDS surveillance group, they did report seeing tons of craft that they classified as UFOs. What's wild about it, again, is that, you know, once you cross the 80s, pretty much, if you have any money at all, and Bigelow was a billionaire, you should be able to videotape this stuff in a way that is just undeniable. You could just create, there's gigantic wide-angle lenses. There's just hire some guys to track things. You've got technology from the Air Force that is above ground to say that if a light shows up, it's a certain brightness in a lens, just start tracking the thing. Move the camera's tripod robotically, especially in the 90s, especially in the 2000s, and you'll actually have some footage that will just change the world, right? Near the Gashute Reservation, the orb sightings are so common that the natives, realizing they don't hurt anybody, they call them the orb-like guardians, is what they call them. And they say when they see them in the sky, this might be looking at satellites, by the way, they say, it moves like the stars, but it moves with the stars, but not like them. How cool is that, right? Simple explanation. Now, again, going back to the 1897 cigar sighting, which they call the Utah airship, they said it had flashing lights on it and was making mechanical noises. Interesting. Does sound pretty human, right? But if we stop for a second and we go, okay, we have these, desert drawings in Peru. You can't draw some of that stuff without actually being able to see it from the sky, in my opinion. And it's arranging rocks in this particular formation. And some of these things are incredible. Some of them, you could see how someone could create some of the birds and that kind of stuff. But I think they get into monkeys with tails and things. The notion is, even if you could create those with human brains, whenever those were created, we don't know when they were made, why would you? Why would you create something you can't see? Well, your girlfriend asks you, honey, what'd you do? Oh, baby, I created a monkey out in the desert. You did? What do you mean? Well, if you're way up 1,000 feet in the air, you can see a monkey. Well, that's great, honey. Sure you did. Sure. Well, I'm never going to be 1,000 foot in the air, sweetie, so whatever. Unless you had an airship. So the question is, would an alien draw things in the ground that's not anatomically perfectly correct? Probably not. I don't know what the purpose would be. They would be sending a message down to man, drawing pictures that you can only see if you're up in the air. That doesn't make any sense, right? And then why would the humans be making these drawings for whoever they think is up in the sky to see? I drew you a monkey. What are you going to give me internal life? That doesn't make any sense either. What makes sense to me is that the individuals who did it had the airships. And that perhaps for a short period of time, or for wherever period of time, all the time is all screwed up with how long, tribes have been on various continents. It's all lies. They did it as a matter of celebration. They did put up airships so they could see their own work. Would a UFO have lights? Well, probably. But would a UFO have mechanical machinery in it that you could hear? Not sure. The thing my grandmother saw in the 20s, she said, I remember her saying this to me, she said there were several of them at once. She always said there was a few of them, but they made no noise. And what she said was that there was a little bit of smoke coming out the back. Now, she had been on planes before and jets before. She knew generally what a turbine would do. She said they were absolutely silent. Now, it could be so far away that if there was a little bit of mechanical action out there, maybe there would be a sound if she was a little bit closer. But it was always the smoke, she said, that came out the back that never made any sense to me. If it's a blimp, why would there ever be smoke coming out the back? Unless, instead of having some sort of lighter than air helium or something like that, hydrogen in it, they're actually burning something inside the canopy part of it, right? The bubble part of it, and that they're simply shoveling the smoke out the back. So it creates the heat inside to create lift, but it's just a first iteration, sort of Gilded Era elite flying around going, wait till they figure out what we're doing here. Because by 1920, you're within striking distance of Germany driving around formal, beautiful vessels in the sky. So it seems logical they would start somewhere. Why they would hide it after so many years, your guess is as good as mine. So now, near the 9 Mile Canyon, there's petroglyphs with pretty non-human characters, some sort of indication of orbs up in the sky, and they've drawn some sort of chariot up in the sky. Now, I got to see this to believe it, because I'll try to find the photographs for us, but because if you find a continent that doesn't have the wheel, and someone draws a petroglyph with a wheel, a chariot always has wheels, right? It has at least two. Then you would be talking about, the Egyptians had wheels in chariots, so it might be an Egyptian-based thing. Now, why would UFOs have chariots with wheels? Doesn't make any sense. Now, there's Bible verses and things like that, but I think that we simply are trying to say it's a vehicle in the sky, and our vehicles have wheels. But the local natives didn't have that. Now, apparently, the story I told you about the Navajo, it's Navajo Mountain in the Four Corners area. They have an oral tradition to talk about the star people. And again, according to, was it David Icke, he said that Zulu meant people from the stars, which even if you make that outrageous claim, it should be pretty easy for some paleontologist to go, no, it's not what it means. I've never heard it disputed. But to believe that, star people came down and issued warnings to the people, officially, this is still a story that's told. I'll try to look up what the warnings were and put it on the screen if you're coming through YouTube. So that's some of the official stuff about the Skinwalker Ranch. It's kind of nice to just get the background, isn't it? And get the whole story. Now, obviously, if you watch the show and you listen to interviews from the Shermans, you're going to hear lots of different stories. Now, that guy who I think was a sheriff, he had talked about being next to a fence once when they had found an animal that had been mutilated, and that there was some, I believe he said that there was one of the non-human beings very close to him and Terry Sherman. For me, it's the chronology of the whole thing, right? Prior to the Myers buying the land, you have tons of sightings of things from the Native Americans, the Ute and the Navajo. They had tons of sightings that seemed to be absolutely congruent with everything the Shermans saw. So it's interesting to have, the Shermans, if you were just take the Shermans all by themselves and say, hey, the Myers never saw anything, but the Shermans are seeing blue orbs, orange orbs, all kinds of different interactions with humanoid, both invisible, non-visible, plus this Wolfman thing, plus discs, triangles, all this wild stuff, electromagnetic stuff. If you take that just by itself, it would seem crazy. For 2 years, this crazy stuff starts happening. Your only explanation at that point would be the government would be doing a bunch of wild testing with new crafts that they're experimenting with. But portals opening up with blue sky in them, well, that's probably way past anything any government can do. But the fact that the Native Americans, for God knows how many centuries prior, had integrated this into their culture. So the only conspiratorial thing you could accuse the Shermans of, who didn't take advantage of anything, but that they actually heard about the stories from the Native Americans and simply made all this up. It didn't help them in any way, shape, or form. They literally left due to financial loss and stress from the situation. So let's say you're having a financial loss and you're like, look, man, I'm going to sell this to the Sci-Fi Channel, which I believe existed at the time, but you could find other channels to buy it from you. 60 minutes, you could make a little bit of cash, 60 grand here, 100 grand there, and you could pull yourself out of a financial problem. But they didn't. Then the Bigelow guy buys the place. A billionaire buys the place, forms an organization. Now, what that kind of feels like to me when I first read it was that, okay, well, the government's doing a bunch of stuff in that area, and this guy's obviously tied in. He's got the excuse for having the money to buy the land. 512 acres ain't nothing for that guy, especially if it's been abandoned by the Shermans. He probably got for pennies on the dollar. Okay. And he doesn't seem to work the land at all. He just puts a bunch of scientific equipment, hires a bunch of guys to do it. He holds on to the land from 96 to 2016. So, 10 years. Then, of course, the play that's happening more recently with this adamantium real estate company, that seems like a very logical play from a guy that's like, hey, man, this thing's got a huge story behind it. I can take this land and roll it over several times for different shows. The only problem is it looks like they're trying to film a little too quick, perhaps. What's really interesting about the show that I thought was a good setup was that they do this all the time when you want, to set a bedrock for any paradigm you're trying to introduce to reality. You bring on a bunch of very experienced people with gigantic pedigrees, and there's nothing shy of the pedigrees that are on there. But I've heard some, incredibly ridiculous stuff. So one guy had a telephone that had a cracked screen that was like just absolutely shattered. And suddenly his phone is like starting to like, the grid on the face of the phone is starting to short circuit because he just never bought a new phone. I mean, come on, dude. And so it's operating the phone. It's doing a bunch of like interface interactions. And of course, they're not technical programmers and electrical engineers. So they don't understand how the phone's built, how it works. It's a very normal thing that happens with the phone. My last phone, or 2 phones ago, I had to replace it because there was a crack right across the fingerprint thing. And even though I could get it to swipe up, type in my code, the apps would start functioning by themselves or anything near that area. Well, this guy had so many cracks on his phone, there wasn't a single place where there was a live button that wasn't going to short circuit its own internal like false input. But then the guy was saying, man, that's an iPhone. No one can crack an iPhone. It's like, oh, yes, they can, brother. Yes, they can. A lot of that stuff's just propaganda when they want you to believe that one phone is not crackable. And I don't want to get off on this too much, but when you hear about a crime being committed, it's very serious, and iPhones are the barrier between the agencies that need to find and prosecute these individuals. They've already got the phone, mainly because all the data that was entered into the phone has been echoed out to databases that are controlled by those organizations, and they can just subpoena those records, look at the data. They don't need the physical phone anymore. But if you want to create a little PR stunt to make your phone more trusted when it's actually one of the easiest phones to hack, you do that to make people feel, hey, you have one of the most open architecture devices on planet Earth that any agency can walk in 2 seconds, especially with all the social media apps people have on their phones. That allows them in, right? But we're going to pretend like this is really secure so more people buy that phone, thus revealing all their information about themselves. We can do, if they commit crimes, we got them. It's so simple, okay? Now, what I find interesting is sort of the subtext behind potentially, anytime I hear about the TR-3B, the triangle, well, that seems to me like a very U.S. military, U.S. Skunks Works craft that they're just simply testing in a remote area. So then if you also hear about discs in the area, you kind of go, well, that may be some other thing. Remember at Puget Sound, where they have the harbor, where, I don't know, 4 to 6 ships come out over this little ridge and they're spewing out like molten steel. It kills a guy's dog, breaks the guy's son's arm. He actually had a big piece of it that he had photographed in the newspaper. You can look that up. It's in my Men in Black episode if you want to see that. Men in Black showed up all around the place. The guy took a bunch of pictures of what he saw, took it down to the photomat, had them developed, and got back a simple slip that said, "Oh, sorry, something happened to your film." I mean, what an idiot! My God, you take that to your buddy Earl, who has a negative development studio in his basement. And you sit over him with a shotgun to make sure those things get done. But that's 47 before the Roswell crash. Doesn't seem like alien technology because why would a donut-shaped disc, at least a disc with a hole in the center, be knocking out molten aluminum or whatever the hell this stuff was? It's a big chunk of it. He holds it in a newspaper with it, people standing around because this stuff was everywhere. I mean, did they put frogmen in the water to get it all out of the water? Because technically, if you just dredge that place right now today, if it wasn't dragged out of the basin of the harbor, the base of the harbor, then it'd still be there. Be some of it. Do a little metallurgy on that and see if it was made in this world, Now, if this was a government-related situation where, again, 94 to 96, that's when the Shermans owned the place, okay? Now, I talked to a dude from Desert Storm. He was I think the dude was a ranger, but he was in some serious technology during Desert Storm. I don't want to reveal too much about the guy, but I met him. I saw the bullet holes through his body. He's a big, oafy guy. And I talked to him for an hour, okay? And he's like, man, we had stealth suits that we were wearing in 91, and he goes, we just kept crawling and marching closer and closer to these positions in Iraq, like the air bases that they need to secure. And I said, what do you mean stealth? And he goes, well, it's not stealth as in if it was daytime, you couldn't see me. He goes, it just meant that there was no signature of heat. I was the exact temperature of the environment. So when they were looking out at us with infrared, we weren't in their radar. And he goes, there was a point when we got close enough, we have to start taking these guys out. And he goes, we're just picking them off like crazy. He said they got so frustrated, they told the anti-air guns to point at the desert and just start spraying the desert because they had no idea where these guys were. And he goes, it was pretty terrifying. I can't remember his injury was a result of that particular maneuver, but that made sense. And then, of course, during the last 15 years, we think we've seen some pretty good proof that the actual full daytime predator stealth suits exist, except you don't really wear any armor. You're just a dude in a very skinny suit that will show whatever's behind you on the front of you, and it doesn't distort unless you really run really quickly, and then there's a little bit of distortion. But they use those guys to put lasers on things before they had technological replacements for that. And that's what guided, some of the smart bombs into the right targets. But why mention that in this episode? Well, if you had let's just say a catalog of technology that you're trying to test in the government, you may say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to set it up in this area. And, maybe the Myers don't even care. Maybe it's not running while they care. Maybe there was literally a change of property from the Myers to the Shermans, and they're looking, man, we're going to use this particular area. It just swapped ownership. Maybe they even planned it in 92 when they didn't think someone was going to buy it right away, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. But of course, we do have claims of things that doesn't seem to be a human-based capability, stacking up cattle that's still alive. One, what would be the purpose for either an alien or us to do it as a military capacity? Flying ships and orbs, okay, well, these orbs are seen way before we had flight, by the Native Americans themselves. So, and they seem to be, again, viewed all over that area. Now, one of the little side things, which doesn't really account for this because I haven't heard of a lot of blue orbs, except for people just filming, orbs in the sky. But the orange orb has been seen everywhere, all over the planet, okay? Especially in England, Scotland. It's recent sightings in 2008 all over Texas. My buddy Charlie saw it in Kansas. And they all say the same thing. You go look at the interviews to see it's so bright you could read a newspaper. Something to that effect, right? The farmers in Scotland thought their field was on fire. And the guy goes outside and everyone's watching this thing. So hundreds of people saw this stuff, right? But now a blue orb constantly showing up in the desert, okay? There's a theory about that, which is that once you realize that the world has a electrical interior, and then when lightning bolts come out of volcanoes, that's just simply path of least resistance, making it out some volcanoes when they're going off. But one of the things that's been witnessed several times is that when you have rock exposed without any foliage over it, the rock shifts. It just does, a natural thing. The world expands 19 centimeters a year. They don't track it anymore, but that's the truth. While that's happening, you could have some sort of crack that goes really, really deep, and a little bit of electricity combines with a little bit more electricity, and you start getting plasma starting to surface. Well, if that were to pop out of the cracks, which again has been witnessed by hikers, you will get what's traditionally called ball lightning. It's a ball because it has this pressure around it, which is the atmosphere, and it's incompatible with the atmosphere. It has enough electricity in it. Again, my grandfather saw one that was the size of a softball bounce into the kitchen and bounce off a bunch of appliances and go right back out the window. He says it was just sizzling. It was this wild electrical sizzling. But they could be as big as a car. And if you looked up at it, it would look like a mirror because it's going to reflect everything that hits it, which means you're going to be upside down and backwards on the lower hemisphere of it, right? If it were spinning really intensely, because of whatever happened when it came out, it was just moving really quickly, but it does stabilize. You could see it in a disk because the equator is going to start to do an ellipsis, right? Now, as far as these things taking off 8,000 miles an hour one direction, Well, it could be that the atmosphere is doing what we call an air pocket. And when that happens, it merely just ticks the edge, and you have a bunch of power going off. It's almost like banging two glass tables together and they both shatter, right? Or one of them shatters and the other one doesn't. In this particular case, it's just creating a gravity well, and it just hauls butt. You don't hear the sonic boom because it's quantum locked with reality. It's moving the molecules out of the way and rearranging them back the way they were on the other side. So it's just cutting through the atmosphere like crazy. It's a good thing these things are at low altitudes in almost every single case, because if you had some sort of passenger plane taking off in Salt Lake City, one of these things pops out and just lasers right through the fuselage, you may not even know what happened. It just falls out of the sky, and maybe the rubble shows you the mark it happened in. So far hasn't happened, thank God. So it could be that Native Americans who are seeing blue energy could be seeing something like that. It could actually also explain what might be happening near the Fukushima problem because of the gigantic earthquake. Even though there is grass everywhere over there, but there's a lot of fields over there. Since the whole substrate of Japan had been shaken to a 9.1 earthquake, right? It's an unimaginably huge earthquake. Again, just remember, an 8 is twice a 7. A 9 is twice an 8. I mean, these are massive exponential doubling of the power. So when you have a 9, that's almost, cataclysmic world history stuff going on there. So who knows? I kind of like the spirit version of it myself. So for those of you who have ever been interested about the Skinwalker Ranch, now you have the Paul Harvey to the story. A lot more history to have a good piece of dialogue with. My hope is that these deep dives into the subjects give you the tools that if you ever meet anyone from these areas, you can immediately dive in and go, well, did you know the Shermans, man? Did you know, what if you ever met the sheriff, Or if you did ever meet the sheriff, you can automatically start asking some really good questions as opposed to going through the stuff the guy's answered 1,000 times. And I'll give you an example. When I was filming MK Ultra Radio, or not filming it, recording it for the podcast, one of my friend's mothers grew up on Groom Lake before Area 51 was created. And she was there when they were eminent domaining the land during the Obama administration, and she broke to me that they had a gag order on them. They were going to get a pittance for the land when it was worth 3 times as much as they were given. The judge said, you can't tell anybody we're stealing this land from you. And we broke that on our show 2 weeks before it was basically international news. You could be that person too if you just kind of get your ducks in a row and there's something you're interested in, especially this subject. Now you're armed and ready to go. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Everything's up there. Remember, we have a top picks up there too. So if you're new to the show and you're like, man, I want to sort through all this crap, I just want the good stuff. Just understand, if you do see one of the old episodes of Black and White, there's still lots of pictures in there. Usually the ones I'm picking are the ones that actually have a lot of good visuals. Again, like spontaneous combustion. You'll have photographs of every single photograph of those events since the beginning, which I think if I'm right, it started in the 1500s. That's one that still hasn't been solved yet. And remember, when the bone completely burns away, that's a tremendous amount of flash fire. It's not just like a normal person lighting themselves on fire with a cigarette. But get up there. There's podcasts for audio, video for folks that want to watch my mug. We have t-shirts. Season 1's on a separate channel on YouTube. Make sure you check that out. We're also on BitChute and Rumble. We're on a bunch of different social media in case you want to get notifications from different sources. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you on the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.